If you've ever been on this godforsaken invention known as the internet, you've most likely encountered liminal spaces. Maybe you've waded through dozens of unsettling, dreamlike images that glue your feet to the floor, or perhaps this is your first time learning that this feeling even has a name. Parks void of children, living rooms in pristine condition that somehow feel abandoned, perfectly clear pools, undisturbed by movement or even breath. Endless hallways, dim lights in bright places, claustrophobia in a wide open space. What was here and why is it gone? Why can't you find a way out? The unsettling aesthetic has become incredibly popular over the past few years, garnering its own genre of Reddit snobs and Pinterest boards. It spawned a million pieces of horror media, creepypastas, video games, and movies that are all trying to grasp at a perfect recreation of liminality. It is not an easy task to combine comfort with unease, familiarity with the unknown, and evoke a deep dread without making it feel forced and overt. It's one line you have to walk slowly and with care, unless you're a Nintendo 64 video game developer. Then you can do it without even trying. You can create the Mona Lisa of liminal spaces with a box-shaped room and a dream. The empty, immersive, faux realistic worlds of this era tower up and around you, with blank, cubic NPCs lingering in corners and cut-off rooms. The technicolor trees and skies lay flat and unmoving against dingy lighting and black, square backgrounds. You're alone and surrounded by something. You were placed in a world sculpted to lure you in, yet you can't seem to move forward. Can you save the progress you've already made? Have you even made any progress at all? Today, I am going to force you to learn about the liminality of the Nintendo 64 and why its games, though comforting, might not sit right in your memories. Haha, you got duped. We're gonna start out with a history lesson. This is the Magic School Bus for people who have a very complicated relationship with the passage of time, so buckle up, bitches. I'm Miss Frizzle. Liminality as a concept was first coined as an anthropological term by folklorist Arnold van Gennep. His work primarily focused on transitional phases of human life, which he explored in his most famous book, Les Rites de Passage, or The Rites of Passage. I don't speak French, but I can if you like, ow, etc., etc. I'm sure you've heard the term rite of passage before, and you can thank Mr. Mustache here for birthing the term and nailing down the concept of societal status changes. In this piece, released in the early 20th century, he defines a rite of passage as the leaving of one group to join another. Every member of society is considered to be a part of multiple separate groups. These could be ages, job titles, religions, geographical locations, marriage status, anything in that realm, even stages of pregnancy and death. If you're beginning to feel like you're being lectured, you are. You clicked on the wrong video and you're paying for your sins. Van Gennep divided the rite of passage into 3 phases: preliminary, liminality, and post-liminality. You may have heard these called separation, liminality, and incorporation, but same book, different cover. The preliminary phase sees a person remove themselves from their previous group and prepare to move on. It's our starting point, so think getting ready to go from your home. The second phase, liminality, which we're all here for, is the space between before and after. It's the time between our starting point and our destination. Liminality is detachment from both your old group and the group you're moving into. The final step, post-liminality, is the end of your journey. You assimilate into your new group and take on this new part of your identity, completing the rite of passage. Van Gennep's idea defines liminality as the in-between and a state of transition. Anthropologist Victor Turner further studied the idea and characterized the period as one of humility, seclusion, and tests. A time where society itself is suspended, seeing you moving from one facet to the next. Your identity as a whole is dissolved for a time, bringing on an intense feeling of disorientation and newness. You enter the pit of identity chemicals and become sort of an identity Harley Quinn. Arnold van Gennep is probably rolling in his grave right now, and I don't care. There's obviously a lot more on this subject, but that's most of what you need to know for now. What in the hell does that have to do with weird pictures of living rooms and the N64? Well, time and cultural development can change the definition of concepts, and liminality had its own rite of passage in a way. Spatial liminality, or a physical place that would match the original definition, was a term usually used to define things like rest stops, airports, and hallways. They're spaces in between two destinations. We can see a lot of those hallmarks in liminal space images, but they generally don't require an actual liminal space. They tend to simply feel abandoned, out of place, nostalgic, or wrong. I think this interpretation could stem from the fear and uncertainty of liminal stages in life and the disconnect from the world that Turner brought up. There's a loneliness and unknown to those transitional phases, and those feelings can come up with the images I've been showing you. But thankfully, there's been a study on this portion, so I can bastardize somebody else's work. Giving old Arnold a break here and taking on some people who are still living and can hunt me down if they want. In Alexander DL and Michael Lewis's 2022 article, Structural Deviations Drive an Uncanny Valley of Physical Places, they research what exactly evokes fear in these liminal spaces. To make a long and very interesting piece short, they found that the scare factor of uncanny or liminal images can be correlated with deviation from expectations. When things don't look the way your brain expects them to look, it can bring up the fear and subsequent threat of the unknown. The unfamiliar is scary, and places that we know aren't familiar when they don't match our idea of normal. In most liminal space images, the environments tend to be void of expected people and objects, or ambiguous in some way, shape, or form. But they're often identifiable places, like a mall or a home, which makes them feel familiar. You have a set idea in your mind of how things should look and feel, and when that doesn't happen, you can no longer trust what you innately know. Makes sense? No? Cool, okay. I'll try and make it make sense as we go, but unfortunately, I am stupid and not a psychologist or anthropologist, so take my ideas with a grain of salt. When I looked into liminal spaces in video games, a particular era came up over and over again, and that was the 5th generation of video game consoles. This time frame begins around 1993 and ends somewhere between 2003 and 2006. The 5th generation of consoles was known primarily for encompassing the transition from 2D graphics to 3D graphics. This particular era happens to contain the Nintendo 64. Some of the most fondly remembered video games of all time originated right here on this bad boy. It introduced so many Nintendo staples and changed expectations of gaming forever, but going from 2D to 3D was not necessarily something that looked polished at first, we'll say. I saw Super Mario 64 mentioned as a liminal video game more than any other title, and to be honest, that was a bit confusing to me when I first sat down to play it. It's pretty much a quintessential Mario game. I mean, you see Mario rescue Peach from the clutches of Bowser, as he usually does. There are Toads, Goombas, Thwomps, I mean, everything a white person would call their grandparents. I think that's pretty good. This game in particular, though, is set within the walls of Peach's castle, with the opening room being painted to look like an outdoor Mario level. The outlines of grass and clouds look blurry compared to Mario's blocky model. Toad phases in and out of existence as you navigate from door to door, searching for hidden secrets behind paintings. It's an iconic game for a reason. It's fun, it's cute, and fairly easy to get the hang of. Sure, there were era-appropriate bits and pieces of the rendering that felt a bit lopsided, but other than that, it was hard for me to grasp what people found so off-putting. The earlier levels in general seemed pretty fine, with those towards the end becoming more and more expansive. Something you can see a lot of in 5th gen games is darkness, and not necessarily the metaphorical kind. Heavier shadows and black void pieces can help add dimension, but in certain cases they feel a bit like YouTube analog horror. The texture of the background also differed heavily from Mario's, which made things feel meshed together and stuck. The closed-off, boxy feeling of the levels can also contribute to a sense of claustrophobia. Even with all that said, I still wasn't sold on this being the most liminal game ever. The music was very upbeat, and it distracted from any lingering concern that I might have had, and I really enjoyed hopping around and wahooing every few seconds until I started getting a migraine, and then it wasn't so fun. But I think part of my issue was constant movement. When I was playing the game, I was focused on completing things and getting through as fast as I could. When I stopped for a bit, especially in places where the music waned, the sense of loneliness crept up. The NPCs in Mario 64 didn't usually interact or move in the same way that Mario does, which made them feel more like props at times. When my focus was turned on the gameplay itself, it felt very normal, but when I focused in on the scenery, I was able to see what all those people meant. It felt very dreamlike, high saturations mixed with fuzzy, unreadable textures. It didn't ever unsettle me to a point of genuine fear, but it wasn't perfect either. It is important to note though that I never played Mario 64 as a kid, and nostalgia is a big factor in liminality for plenty of people. So, that very much could have contributed to my less severe reaction. I'm curious to hear what you think though. Does it give you that liminal feeling? Does the big Mario head at the beginning make you feel primally threatened? Pokemon Snap, released in 1999, was a simple photography game that had the player slide through different settings to take pictures of various Pokemon. It was a pretty damn successful game, selling 3.6 million units and ending up as the 11th best-selling N64 game, so not rookie numbers. Images of a little guy, they're gonna sell. They're gonna get to the masses. Pokemon Snap is a fantastic game, and I'd be damned if I didn't enjoy the hell out of it while I was playing, but it takes those odd textures, rigid models, and iffy lighting settings to a different level for me. Professor Oak, who originally invited you to help with his Pokemon research, leaves you alone to go on expeditions. You're the only real human character to come across while you're adventuring, except for a lone few, and the land doesn't always look quite right. The sky seems dull at points, the water perfectly smooth, and all you have is your camera. It's calming at its core, but almost to an unsettling degree at times. The Pokemon themselves often distract from that feeling, but there are rare cases where they don't even feel right. You're not fully alone, but you're not with others either. The study also mentioned that humans seem to have a very high sensitivity to distortion with both human and animal images, which could be an explanation for why such small bits and pieces of the Pokemon felt off. Even a small amount of rigidness seemed to register with me, which is obviously pretty common for older video games, but it was very noticeable in Snap specifically. The shadows of the land and rock look very separate from everything above, but the movement is smooth and consistent. It was an odd case that made me feel both warm and empty at the same time. I wasn't 100% sure about what I wanted to do with Ocarina of Time here. I feel like plenty of scenes in Zelda games are meant to be unsettling to the player, which doesn't quite match up with the idea of a liminal space. Liminal spaces aren't necessarily evil or trying to harm you, but something in your brain tells you they aren't right. However, Zelda also has a lot of areas and scenes that are just off. There's too much or too little, and your field of vision doesn't seem wide enough. Things feel slow and quiet. Zelda is comparatively the most eerie yet comforting game you could pull from the N64. Many spots on the map feel transitional and impermanent, and the dialogue sticks to you as you go through the game. Link as a character always seems to be going through some sort of liminal phase, but that was likely the idea. It matches our criteria in so many ways, and in others it feels too overt for that title. It feels inaccessible in a way, like there's a well of information hidden everywhere around you. Ocarina of Time is a masterpiece, and I'm sure it evokes that same odd feeling for many of you. All I know is that Link is saying "Hya," and that's what I care about. Super Smash Bros. For the 64, the first game in the massively popular series, was a smash, haha. please don't hurt me hit, spawning a huge franchise for Nintendo. I was never too big into Smash until recently, but let me tell you, I understand nowadays. I fucking love a little violence. You don't need all that much of a plot summary for Smash, but the gameplay was incredibly interactive and mirrored arcade games of the time. But it does feel very weird, and I think that adds to its atmosphere. Most maps where characters could fight felt completely separate and suspended, either floating or simply stuck somewhere. The stages leaned more isolated, with flat, unapproachable backgrounds and high places to fall from. Isolation tends to be a large part of dream core and liminal images, and also calls back to Victor Turner's description of the liminal phase being one of absence and otherness. It's fast-moving and action-packed, but the moment it stalls, it's blank. It's also interesting to think about the displacement of characters from other franchises. You're used to seeing Link in The Legend of Zelda, Kirby and Kirby, all of that. Displacement and pattern deviation could be applied here, even if it's not necessarily uncomfortable or bad, only different. It could help add to the experience of liminality. Something that's between what you know, characters from past franchises, and what you don't, the fighting scenario. Donkey Kong games have always been a pinnacle of this feeling for me, even before I knew there was a word for the sensation. I remember sitting on the floor, Wiimote in hand, playing Donkey Kong Country Returns. Every single time I was about to die, I'd leap up and turn the game off before the horrifying game over screen could play. Donkey Kong 64, whether influenced by old memories or not, had a similar effect on me, and it was actually probably worse. Every single facet of the game felt so stilted against the dark, pitch-black backgrounds. Each new phase felt like some sort of unending tunnel, with even the levels with greenery feeling stuffy and enclosed. The entire world was so cut off that it didn't even feel like a game. Thankfully, the N64 had the Donkey Kong wrap, which fixed everything for me without any issues, and I'm cured of every problem I've ever had in my entire life. Thank you, Donkey Kong. Specific shout out to Wrinkly Kong, who I love saying the name of. There are plenty of other N64 games that I could talk about here, but the last one I really wanted to touch on is GoldenEye 007. GoldenEye was highly praised by critics for its innovative shooting mechanics and strong adaptation of the James Bond storyline, which the game was based on. You played as, James Bond, moving through different levels and clearing out enemy forces. It truly revolutionized the idea of console shooting games, and in my opinion, flowed incredibly well. The small puzzles, extra objectives, and fast pace helped to form 007 into one of the most influential video games ever made, and also one of the fucking scariest. Holy shit. If this image hasn't been burned into my brain like a failed MRI, nothing could ever scare me like that. This video is more about the spaces themselves, but wow, good god. Anyway, the scenery, right? Much of GoldenEye takes place in industrialized settings, with long hallways and corridors making regular appearances. If we go back to Arnold van Gennep's original theory, he actually presents a house with lots of hallways as a metaphor for rites of passage, going from one room to the next. I don't really have the words to explain GoldenEye. I mean, you can see it right here. Everything around you is quiet once you've fired your gun. One of my best friends, Vi, played and loved GoldenEye, and I was sort of curious whether or not they still found the game, whatever this is. That sense of nostalgia painted over a lot of odd-looking games for me when I was younger, but Vi said that the game did in fact freak them out a bit. I grilled other friends about this idea too. Amanda, the Amanda Files, my beloved, told me about the Chow Gardens in Sonic Adventure 2 for the Dreamcast. My friend Jessie Matrix, told me about how much she loved Kingdom Hearts and how the liminality didn't really translate. Everybody has a different experience with how they see games and how they see the concept of an unsettling world. Obviously, as I just talked about games that weren't on the N64, this wasn't exclusive. Nostalgia and fond memories can sometimes cancel out anything that you might find odd. Sometimes that's what sticks out. However you experience or don't experience liminality in the N64 is fantastic, and I'd love to hear about it. Anyway, liminality can be found in almost every form of art, and the N64 found itself a sort of sweet spot. Big changes in the industry will always feel weird and off at first, and that doesn't take away from any of their value. Liminality is a beautiful thing in its own right, and change and transition is beautiful. If you played any of these games in their prime, feel free to let me know how they made you feel, but nicely or I'll be a bitch back to you. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you. I hope you have a lovely day, and thank you to all of my members for helping support me. I appreciate you very much. Thank you so much. Stay safe, stay wonderful, my friends, and goodbye.